But we have one more presentation on this panel. Kate Meyer with the Forest Service, and I love an opportunity to embrace the work of the Forest Service any chance I get. So this is really good stuff. So Kate, come on up.
Thanks, Adam. All right, big step. Well, I feel really privileged to be here to share our story of rewilding. I think I'm the only government employee in the house, so we'll see how many boos I get by the end of this. I've been a fisheries biologist and a restoration practitioner for the Forest Service on the Mackenzie River, so just over the pass, for about 17 years now. And I've been on the restoration assistance team for Oregon and Washington for about 13 years. And this is a team of experienced restoration practitioners. And in the last decade, we've really shifted away from form-based engineered restoration to something more holistic, process-based, and larger scale. So I'm going to give you just a little teaser for where we're at today and kind of the evolution of an emerging restoration philosophy, and then show you examples from the Mackenzie River watershed. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. All right. Okay, so unconfined river valleys are the ecological nexus of mountain landscapes across the West. They are characterized by dynamic physical, chemical, and biological processes that are constantly changing and renewing the surface and the subsurface of those valley floors. And this dynamic nature creates a shifting habitat mosaic that is critical to everything from microbes to megafauna. This is the premier arena for ecological interactions between and among species. And if they're functioning properly, they offer diverse ecosystem services like flood attenuation, nutrient cycling, water and sediment storage, carbon sequestration, drinking water, food, and recreation. Unconfined valleys are disproportionately important to biodiversity and landscape scale ecological integrity. Unfortunately, they're also disproportionately affected by human infrastructure and activities like road, levee, dam construction, floodplain development, removing wood and beavers, things that turn this dynamic, complex, connected valley into a single thread, highly efficient transport channel that's completely lost its function, biodiversity, and ecological integrity. Has anybody heard of the term stage 0 restoration? Oh, we got a few. All right. Well, this is where that term comes from. So this is the stream evolution model. It might be a little difficult to see. That depicts the stages of evolution that a valley bottom goes through in response to disturbance. And essentially, this updates an older version of the model based on new evidence that suggests that in most unconfined valleys, the pre-disturbance condition was actually a anastomosing or multi-thread, highly connected channel wetland complex. That is new science. So as a valley undergoes disturbance, water tends to concentrate into a single channel. That has a lot of energy, that starts cutting down into the valley floor and really disconnects it from its floodplain. Given the right conditions, it can reform anastomosing conditions, but at a lower base elevation, and we call that stage 8, circled in yellow there. So where do you think most of our streams and rivers fall in this diagram? 4-2, yeah. Most of our streams and rivers are in stages 2 through 6, so below that dotted line. These pie charts represent the proportion of potential hydrogeomorphic and ecosystem benefits in each stage. Stage 0 having the greatest, and stage 8 a close second. So most of our rivers and streams are in stages 2 through 6 below that dotted line, and they're functioning at a fraction of their potential. So how do we restore these functions and get these benefits back? How do we rewild our river valleys in a meaningful way? We give them their freedom. We give them as much active lateral space as possible and the ability to evolve again and to let those processes play out. All of our native flora and fauna have evolved with those processes. So how do we do this? There are a range of ways to achieve that stage 0 or stage 8 anastomosing condition through process-based restoration. For less degraded or smaller streams, some of your high mountain meadows, process-led techniques on the left side of the spectrum are a great option. These include beaver dam analogs, post-assisted log structures. They may take time and multiple years to achieve that condition. For more degraded systems or larger rivers, process reset techniques on the right side of the spectrum may require heavy equipment to remove anthropogenic features like levees, to manually fill and lift those channels back up to that historic floodplain, and to place large amounts of wood throughout the valley. Ideally, process reset, it only requires a single intervention to create and maintain those anastomosing conditions. And this is the approach we're taking in the Mackenzie River watershed. So our first stage 0 project was on Deer Creek in 2016. This is entirely on Forest Service lands with moderate constraints, roads, power lines, and the Mackenzie River Trail. Deer Creek was kind of manipulated down into a single thread channel there on the left with very high energy, coarse substrate, and disconnection from the floodplain. So to give Deer Creek its freedom, we moved the power lines to the side of the valley. We relocated the Mackenzie River Trail crossing, and we removed artificial berms. So we excavated sediments from within that valley, and we used that sediment to manually fill and lift that incised channel back up to the floodplain. And then we placed a ton of wood throughout that whole valley. As you can see here, we leave as much vegetated islands and deep pools as possible to provide that immediate habitat diversity and quicker recovery. But ultimately, this is a valley reset. So it's emulating a large disturbance like a landslide or a flood. So there are short-term impacts. But our preliminary monitoring is very encouraging. So the wetted area at base flow, the amount of surface water across that valley, more than tripled, indicated by the light versus dark blue in that left image. Geomorphology and wood monitoring has shown that wood is moving around as we want, but it's not moving off the site. And that those log jams are creating pools, new channels, and gravel bars, and increasing that inundation. And all this dynamism hints that these self-sustaining geomorphic processes are in fact being reactivated. Our substrate monitoring showed a shift from cobble boulder dominant to gravel dominant, which is really important for spawning, as Liz described. So we hadn't had Chinook salmon spawning in Deer Creek since 1993, and after our first phase, they were spawning in Deer Creek again in most years. And then we are also seeing a pretty strong response in cutthroat and rainbow trout reds, showed there in the graph on the right. A macroinvertebrate study comparing restored reaches to unrestored reaches showed that in just 2 years post-project, the restored reach had greater diversity, more than 2 times the biomass, 10 more rare and unusual species that had newly colonized, and substantially greater abundance of more than 20 different taxa. All right, our second stage 0 project was on the South Fork Mackenzie River. In the image on the top right, that's a bare earth LiDAR image showing the McKenzie River and the South Fork coming together and actually sharing the same valley for about 2 miles. If you can see it, you can see an interconnected web of anastomosing channels. And due to human disturbance, like dam construction, those anastomosing channels basically turned into 2 separate single-thread rivers. So we implemented a Stage 0 project on the South Fork across 200 acres in 2018 and 2019, and that is a 1-year post-project photo. The South Fork was entirely on Forest Service land with essentially no constraints, making this the perfect candidate for rewilding. All right, so to free this river, we excavated or cut artificial berms and some natural sediment deposits that were blocking access to historic flow paths. And we used that sediment, again, to manually fill and lift that incised channel back up to the floodplain, and then adding abundant wood throughout the valley. This project immediately resulted in nearly a 4-fold increase in wetted area. Again, the difference between light and dark blue, and opened up many historic flow paths and really increased the amount of available habitat for fish and other critters. Like Deer Creek, we saw a big shift in substrate from cobble boulder dominant to gravel fines dominant. This is really beneficial to Chinook salmon, trout, and Pacific lamprey who need those gravels for spawning, and for larval lamprey who live in those fine sediments, which were basically non-existent before the project. We conducted an eDNA study using water samples to look at biodiversity and found that species richness, or number of species, was orders of magnitude higher post-restoration at 2 of the 3 transects, and that there is an increasing trend in species richness, so it's only getting more diverse. The blue bars in this graph indicate Chinook reds within the lower South Fork over the last couple decades, and the red line is total Chinook reds in the entire McKenzie watershed. You can see after we completed phase 2, a huge spike in Chinook reds, and that trend has continued since. So now Chinook, 10 to 20% of the total reds in the entire McKenzie watershed are spawning in the project area, even though it only makes up 1.5% of the surveyed area. And we're seeing huge improvements in our ecosystem services, like carbon sequestration, where a study showed that it was greater in the restored reach than unrestored reaches or an intact reference reach. In flood resilience, you can really see in these photos the difference in energy dissipation, water storage, and high flow refuge for critters. And fire resilience. After the Holiday Farm fire, the same Labor Day fires that Liz talked about, we observed that the fire burned more as a mosaic through the project area, whereas outside the project, it burned more intensely and uniformly through riparian areas. And our final project reach is on the McKenzie River at Finn Rock. This project area is owned privately by McKenzie River Trust. This one was, we implemented phase 1 in 2021, and we're gonna complete the 150-acre project this summer. And this project was full of constraints. So we had Highway 126, adjacent homes in the floodplain, and a heavily boated main stem channel. So we couldn't really lift the McKenzie back up to its historic floodplain and add a bunch of wood. So instead we focused on giving this section of valley as much space as possible to let those processes play out without impacting the boating on the main stem. So for phase 1, we excavated around a series of islands, and we used that sediment to lift and fill the side channel on the site, and then also to fill in an artificial gravel pit at the upper end. So that was a great use of that sediment. And then again, adding abundant, stable buried wood throughout the project. So for phase 2 this summer, we'll be excavating along the main stem Mackenzie to restore a historic flow path and bring more water into the site. That's circled there in red. And then after this project is complete, we'll have increased the wetted area at base flow by nearly 4-fold. So that's a lot more available habitat for our critters. So our aim for all these projects is to restore fluvial processes by resetting that valley template to free it from its degraded state. It's not going to do it on its own, and enable its own self-formation and recovery. So the big question is whether the disturbance associated with this process reset technique is worth it. And our monitoring results are very compelling, but there is still a lot to learn, and this is a new approach to restoration. So there will be much more to come on restoration to stage 0 and 8.